So it's really a great pleasure, and we're delighted to welcome Judge Manfred Dauster, who is a great friend of Bosnia and Herzegovina. He's also a recently retired presiding judge at the Supreme Court of Bavaria. And in the 2000s, he was the head of the Anti-Fraud Department and Prosecutorial Reform Unit of the Office of the High Representative in Sarajevo, and a judge of the Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina in the Appeals Chamber for organized crime and war crimes. Manfred's going to talk about many things today, but one of the things that I hope we'll be able to get into some engaged discussion on is ways to strengthen the enforcement mechanisms in the judiciary of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Manfred is having a little technical issue with his camera, so we're going to hear his voice, but we won't see him today, but he can see all of us. And so, Manfred, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be with you in Germany this afternoon. And it's almost evening. So as you said, Patrick, I have a deep affection for Bosnia and its people. I cannot explain it why, but it was strengthened during my time when I was there. If I talk to you about my thoughts on Bosnia and Herzegovina, please be aware that my capacities are limited. I'm a lawyer and nothing more. And as the Bavarian writer Ludwig Thoma called the profession, he was a good jurist, but of moderate intellect. Keep that in mind. But most of the time, I closely observe the developments, and only common sense is needed to come to a conclusion. And the conclusions that I draw, they are worrying me. Without wishing to dive into the shaky history of Yugoslavia, one hint that I like to give you, we all know the horrifying history, but recently there is a really good book from Hikmet Karcic, and I can only recommend it. It's Torture, Humiliate, and Kill Inside the Bosnian Serb Camp System. And if you like to remember the atrocities, this book will help you the best. But anyway, when I observe Bosnia and the surroundings, I have the feeling of a déjà vu. I clearly remember the time in the beginning 90s and the time how cacophonously world politics had been acting for years and prolonged the war in Bosnia. And what I actually see is a similar development. Brussels is not so much interested in Sarajevo. Berlin is not so much interested in Sarajevo. And even Washington does not spend much attention to what is going on. They are more concerned about Kosovo, what I do not understand. When I am concerned about the situation, in Bosnia. We have external factors to take into consideration. Not so much anymore Turkey. Turkey is more interested in the Middle East and the Near East. Erdogan may, but we have to be aware that Erdogan may sultanically recall that Bosnia and Herzegovina was once under the curatorship of the High Court. Then we have Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin is pursuing very special intents in the Western Balkans. The example is Milorad Dodik, the secessionists from Republika Srpska. He feels at home in Moscow, and his rearmament of his military forces cannot be conceived without the help of Moscow directly or via Belgrade. But it is a fact that Milorad Dodik has established some military force in the police of Republika Srpska, and nobody is aware what is going on there. And in long term, I do not know what Vladimir Putin intends in the Western Balkan. But what I can see is that his policy, in cooperation with Belgrade, is destabilizing the region. And that is concerning. And then we have Serbia. The idea of the Greater Serbia is not given up. It is now named differently. But what we have to take into consideration is that Serbia is characterized by a growing right-wing extremism, which has fascist characteristics and excellent links to the violent extremist right scene in Western Europe. Alexander Vučić has rearmed the Serbian army to an extent that is not justified by threats to Serbia. And we almost forget that Alexander Vučić was one of the closest friends of Slobodan Milošević. And I recall his statements at the time in the Serbian parliament and supporting the atrocities elsewhere. At the moment, with regard to Sarajevo, he has distanced himself a bit. But Alexander Vučić, an autocrat, like others like Putin, is an opportunist. He feels in the moment it's better to keep distance officially to Bosnia. But if you look closer, you will see at any event of Milorad Dodik, representatives of his regime are present. And they are present as war criminals or as his own son. And then we have Croatia. What I can see is a development in Zagreb, that Zagreb shifting to the nationalist side of the Western Balkan. And the attitude of the Zagreb government towards Bosnia is as it was during the war. The rhetoric used invites the assumption that the Bosnian Croats are a minority endangered by the Bosniak majority, and they are not. I will leave it by this comment, but it's concerning as well. And then I come to the current owner of the office of the High Representative, Christian Schmidt. And we are among us, but he's a pain in my ass. I do not understand why the Merkel government proposed him to be High Representative. He hadn't had any affiliation to the Balkans, any. And I can't see that Christian Schmidt has found, in the meantime, found a common thread that would allow him to navigate safely through the political labyrinth of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Schmidt is not a diplomat. He does speak English only poorly. And unlike some of his predecessors, he has no command of the local language or of the history of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And my impression is that he is not interested in the complicated history of this country. In addition, he likes to put his foot in every little hole he has made for himself. You only must observe his public appearance. And that makes it worse. He knows that because of the resistance of the Russian Federation against the office, he is without any alternative. And that makes things worse. Then he has too close relations to Dragan Čović. You all know Dragan Čović. He is one of the old times. He was one of the co-founders of the HDZ in the Herzegovina. He was one who was part of Herzegovina. And he has not given up the idea of a third entity. And he is, with support of Zagreb, he is still working on the Dayton-Edwards plan for this entity. The reasons why Christian Schmidt has that close relationship to the HDZ of Dragan Čović can be found in the fact that the party of Christian Schmidt and the HDZ of Croatia are members of the European People's Party. And I can see that the Bavarian state government in Munich is seeking an almost over-friendly relationship with the Croatian HDZ. That might be a viable explanation. However, Schmidt is therefore viewed critically by large sections of the population of Bosnia and Herzegovina. If he were to finally take note of this, the criticism should give him pause for thought with sufficient self-reflection. But this man is unable to self-reflection. So Schmidt is part of the internal and external problems of Bosnia as I see them. Let's come to the internal conditions. What I can see in the Western Balkan is a growing nationalism, which in some cases descends into fascism. None of the three state-bearing ethnic groups is exempt from this. But the Bosnian Croats skillfully combine their backward-looking right-wing ideology with the suggestion that Croatian participation in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina is in reality non-existent, while the political forces of the Bosnian Serbs aggressively and openly pursue a secessionist policy aimed at weakening state institutions. And they have help, not only in Zagreb. Viktor Orban is one of the supporters of the Bosnian Serbs. And also, Milorad Dodik is sanctioned. Recently, he supported him by 100 million euros, and that is concerning. I don't want to repeat the infinitely long catalogue of domestic political problems in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You all know them. But let us reiterate the precarious financial situation, in particular in Republika Srpska, the very slow economic prosperity in Bosnia as a whole, and not to forget that, the corruption and the kleptocracy that continues to flourish in all areas of public life. And nothing is done on that, or only little. What is even more concerning to me that apparently Christian Schmidt leaves this field to the national authorities, but overlooks the fact that a healthy democracy for which he is responsible needs healthy financial, economic, and social frameworks, conditions, if the vicious circle of nationalist and fascist demagogues is to be broken. In Bosnia, as everywhere in the world, a functioning democracy needs rule of law. Rule of law is one cornerstone and one of the basic conditions for a successful democracy. As a lawyer, I claim to have a rough idea of what a rule of law means and must fulfill. It strikes me that the rule of law in Bosnia is not a topical issue for those in power. Only Milorad Dodik is one who destructively and demagogically carries a part of this topic before him like a monstrance in a Catholic procession, when he repeatedly calls for the abolition of the only national judicial institution, the Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And it becomes worse. If the rumors I have heard are true, the state prosecutor's office wants to indict Milorad Dodik for his persistent denial of the Srebrenica genocide and his disregard for the decisions of the National Constitutional Court. If that is true, he will increase his fight against the state institution. The rule of law, from my perspective, requires legal unity and at least uniformity in the state as a whole. First and foremost with regard to human rights, but also for civil law, administrative law, criminal law, and whatsoever. As long as there is no single Supreme Court in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the country runs the risk of developing different standards in its entities and in the Bridgeko district. This is intolerable for human rights and an obstacle to economic development. Dayton has ensured that substantive legislation is a matter of the two entities and that the state as a whole plays only a marginal role in legislation. However, in order to prevent the legal system created by the entities from drifting apart, an institution is needed that develops national unifying legal principles and standards. How to do that without changing the constitution, what is Sisyphus work, can be discussed. Incidentally, I am not alone with this view. The fact that there is a national constitutional court is certainly not a counter-argument. The Constitutional Court is a special court and has special things to do and cannot replace the missing Supreme Court. I have mentioned the Constitutional Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina. What strikes me is that the Constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the procedural rules governing the court assume, as in other countries, that decisions of the Constitutional Court will be respected and implemented. However, state practice in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in particular in Banja Luka, has shown up to the recent past that respect and implementation are not a matter of course. Constitutional court decisions have also been ignored by some politicians. I mentioned Milorad Dodik, and there is a verdict of the court that the military parade on the day of the Republic is unconstitutional. And what is Milorad doing? He is organizing this parade every year in January. Nothing has happened. I think it is questionable to enforce decisions of the Constitutional Court. It can be disputed whether by means of the criminal law, but not any ignorance of Constitutional Court fulfills the terminology of crime according to criminal law. There must be different means, for example, fines or the finding of loss of office, which are more suitable. And then we have what's concerning me and what drives people in Bosnia. We have the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg. And you all know that in two cases, this court in Strasbourg ruled that the discrimination of non-ethnic people like Jews, Gypsies, and those who refuse to be Serb, Croat, or Bosniak is unconstitutional. These rulings date back for more than 10 years, but the politicians in Sarajevo are not able to amend the constitution in order to eliminate that discrimination. what should the people do? They can go again to the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg, but at the end of the avenue, the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg will rule that the ignorance of his verdicts are against the Convention of Human Rights. But the court is missing an implementation mechanism. And if we vote, that would be my idea, to provide the Constitutional Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina with implementation tools so that this court can implement his own decisions, why not to use this mechanism given to, or to be given to the Constitutional Court? What also strikes me is that the regime in Banja Luka has succeeded to establish some sort of autocratic regime. Liberty of speech and press have become limited, and more concerning is that the judiciary in RS is completely in line with the regime of Milorad Dodik. There are indications that the regime in Banja Luka is misusing public funds, but you cannot expect an RS prosecutor to investigate in those suspicions. And the entire kleptocracy the self-serving kleptocracy of the ruling nomenclatura is a concern that should be investigated, but cannot be investigated under the circumstances that I see in RS and also in the Federation. Despite all the judicial reforms undertaken in the early years of the new millennium, I continue to receive complaints that civil and administration's proceedings are inefficient and too slow. It's not good for the economic development. But what really drives me crazy is that nobody is talking about that in Bosnia. All the circumstances do indicate that something is rotten in the state of Denmark, to paraphrase William Shakespeare. The fact that everyone is keeping quiet about this is not proof of the contrary. So those are my thoughts, and I thank you for your patience in listening to me.
Thank you, Manfred, for a really excellent summary of part of the ways of how we got here. And I wanted to just open the floor now to questions or comments, reactions to your comments. So you can either unmute yourself or raise your hand and I will unmute you. But either way, please go ahead if you have a question or comment. Phil, go ahead.
Hi, nice to meet you, Judge. I don't know when you served. I served on the court from 2008 through the end of 2012.
Just when I left.
Just when you left. Had nothing to do with my arrival, I hope.
No.
No. Yeah, I spoke with the judges last year, and they are quite upset about what's going on at the court. And with the slow pace of the prosecutions, the problems which are happening there, and they're trying to make changes.
The
One of
state
them
court.
at
In
the
the
state
state
court, yeah, the
Oh.
court of Bosnia and Herzegovina. They did hold a program, a training program, I believe in November. What's happened is, since the internationals have left, they have reverted to a lot of older problems, which the internationals seem to change. One of those was that you had to, on the prosecution side of it, you had to prepare witnesses, you had to get them ready, and get them ready to testify. And
Yeah.
the average preparation of a witness is approximately 20 minutes. Many prosecutors never
Enough.
even meet the witnesses.
Yeah.
When I was in The Hague as a prosecutor, I would meet with a major witness for usually 3 days, 3.5 days before I put them on the
Yeah.
witness stand.
Yeah.
They are meeting with witnesses for 20 minutes. So when a witness starts to go off the script or say something that's not expected, the prosecutor suddenly starts yelling at them. When a witness forgets an important statement, the prosecutor starts yelling at them. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to refresh recollection. So that was one thing. They were pretty upset with the prosecutors. And there's definitely a need of training for both judges and prosecutors. Two, with all the new judges there, they don't understand the rules of evidence. They don't understand how to deal with objections. We had done a lot of work with that, but it seems to have just fallen by the wayside. There was also a lot of work the internationals had done on interpreting statutes.
Yeah.
It's where the common law and the civil law disagree. The common law countries take the view, well, if it's not in the statute, that means we can do it. Where the civil countries will mostly say, well, if it's not in the statutes, we can't do it. And that is clogging.
That was a common statement of my part. What is not legally forbidden explicitly is allowed.
Yeah, and that apparently is not happening again. So if it's not there, they won't go ahead and do
That's
it.
worrying. That's worrying.
And I laugh because my last year there, one of the judges comes in and says, can you believe it? We were the last two international judges. And she says, they just came to my office and said, we have a major problem. A person is seriously ill, seriously, critically ill in the lockup at the state court. However, there's no law that says we can transfer them to a hospital.
Oh my God.
So
Human rights.
Yeah. So she says, well, look it, I will just write an order. And they said,
Yeah.
you can't do that. You can't do that. There's no law that says you can transfer them to a hospital. So she figured, she said, okay, then we'll just let them die. And she said it facetiously. She didn't really mean that. And then about 15 minutes later, she comes into my office and she says, I haven't seen them in 15 minutes. Are they really going to let them die? So at that point, the clerks walk in, they're looking for her, and they come to my office, which was down the hall, and they said, we found a way to do it. And my view was, look, I would say, let's just write an order under the superintendency powers of the court. We're transferring them to the hospital. Yeah. I said, I'll write it with you. We're not going to let somebody die. But it seems they've gone back to that. And just when we were trying to train them and get them back, the president of the court gets arrested. It's deeply frustrating. It's upsetting. You worked for years on that court. I worked. We have a love for that court. We want to see it succeed. However, sadly, it's really having serious problems.
That problem goes deeper. It's the education in law at the university, but we cannot change that. On the other side, the attitude of being over formalistic. Yeah, I thought when I left, this attitude has gone, but it's worrying that this attitude has returned by younger judges joining the court. And we must be aware, yeah, that the Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina is the best judicial institution. Can you imagine how it is in a district court in Banja Luka? That's even worse. And it's not only the criminal law that concerns me, yeah? It's the civil law proceedings. It's the administrative proceedings, over formalistic. And all the training that we gave the colleagues in Bosnia has vanished. I do not know, I have no recipe how to change this situation, but we have to restart the discussion on the rule of law in Bosnia. And we cannot accept the attitude of Brussels with regard on Bosnia's way to the European Union. It's all okay. No, it's not okay. It's the contrary. But I do not know who should restart this discussion. The best would be the High Representative. He is a lawyer, but he is not interested because that is a complicated matter. And it's too complicated for the simplistic character of Christian Schmidt. But I do agree it's intolerable.
And I see, Marion, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Manfred, for your input. I mean, we're exchanging also regularly on certain subjects. So I would agree on the majority of the aspects you mentioned, Manfred. I have one question to you, Manfred, right now, and also to the group. Did you follow, for example, also the recent developments in Strasbourg? Because I think this is really very important. We had recently the Kovacevic verdict, right? I think this is a really very important verdict. It's also about the discrimination of Jews, and especially, I mean, in this case, of citizens in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in the meantime, we saw a very interesting development, and that is that Croatia is trying to undermine the independency of the Strasbourg court. Plenković is using his special ties to the director of the European, of the Europarat and of the Council. And there is also one development that is interesting, that Bojana Kristo, she's HDZ Bosnia, right? That she appealed to Strasbourg, and they are trying to undermine right now the independency of the court in Strasbourg. I think this is really serious. And Manfred, just because you were talking also about the verdicts, the discrimination verdicts from Sejdić-Finci and the others. So what would be your idea, Manfred, to stop this interference? I think there was a very interesting article from the Standard. I can send it to you. It's from the colleague Adelheid Wölfel. Unfortunately, it's in German. And she's describing how the Croatian government is trying to attack this recent, this current Kovacevic verdict coming from Strasbourg, talking about the rule of law in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but we have also to talk about these tendencies in Strasbourg.
So I am confident that the court in Strasbourg will have the strength not to follow any interference. But the interference is a political thing. It's not a judicial thing. If the government in Zagreb misbehaves, the other governments of the members of the Council of Europe, they have to raise the issue, not the court. So,
There's the
but if the governments in Lithuania or wherever in Azerbaijan or in Armenia are not interested in the issue, Zagreb will continue.
Yeah, I think this is the point. They are not interested in the matter. So
How to change that? You have more than 40 member states in the Council of Europe.
Mhm.
And you have the Committee of Ministers. And the Committee of Ministers is the place where to discuss such issues. But politically speaking, if the governments are not interested in, Zagreb will continue.
All right. So
It's bitter, but it's realistic.
Other thoughts and comments? I think one of the realities is Bosnia and Herzegovina's adversaries want a weak and dysfunctional system within Bosnia and Herzegovina because it enables them to both continue their war aims, but also to use Bosnia and Herzegovina for their own purposes and their own agenda. So I think we have the question of almost a good governance question that's in terms of the basic functioning of these systems, but we also have these larger questions. For example, Milorad Dodik's flagrant violation of the law that was imposed prior to the last High Representative leaving, Valentin Inzko, imposing a law against genocide denial. I wonder what your thoughts are about ways of strengthening an enforcement mechanism or bringing actual charges based on that violation against Dodik himself.
Now, I reported about rumors from the prosecutor's office on the state level that they will go after him and indict him because of the ignorance and the disrespect to the law on genocide in Srebrenica. And I put the question to one of the prosecutors from the state court and asked them, how do you arrest Milorad Dodik? By police forces of the RS, it will never happen. And I got the answer, in case we indict him, he will show up in Sarajevo, in court. And he will make a show. He will make a show. And if the situation in the judiciary is, as Philip said, yeah, I cannot see a court in Bosnia, and even not the state court, to run such a proceeding properly.
David, any thoughts that you want to contribute?
Oh, no, I just thought it was a very interesting discussion, great presentation. And it's interesting to think that there's no Supreme Court. You know, one might think that the Constitutional Court, not the Constitutional, the court, that the National Court would be sufficient, but it's interesting to point out that there's no Supreme Court. I guess there's a Supreme Court in the Federation and one in the
RS and
in the RS. And only thing I was thinking is that I think there's one example, positive example recently, that the prosecutor is bringing charges against the director of an NGO called Istočno Alternativa, Eastern Alternative, for a banner that was hung in Bratunac glorifying Ratko Mladic. So this is a violation of the law that is imposed, and so I thought that was a positive development. It probably has something to do with the proximity to Srebrenica, but it raises the question, why haven't they prosecuted the mural for Mladic at the entrance to Kalinovic? So, but I thought that was one positive step in the right direction to prosecute the NGO for glorification of convicted war criminals.
So,
But
yeah.
David, as long as condemned war criminals take part in arrest parades, something is rotten in Denmark. As long as condemned or images of condemned war criminals are glorified in the streets of Belgrade, again, something is wrong and rotten in Denmark. But that's the rule. That's the rule in Bosnia, that's the rule in Serbia. You cannot cross a street in Serbia, in Belgrade, without the image of war criminals on facades of houses. And if someone prosecuted, something is wrong in the state of Denmark.
Yeah, but Manfred, I think this is one part of the matter. On the other hand, we see really a very sad appeasement policy on behalf of also of Brussels, of the Biden administration, and also of our government in Berlin. Yeah, I know. So we have these criminals. I mean, and even after the manipulated elections in Serbia, Brussels and Berlin didn't react. So I think this is, for my understanding right now, the most difficult and sad part in that story. And I think we have, if we would like to change something, at the first place we have to change our policy, our Balkan policy, and especially also our Bosnian policy, our Serbian policy. Kurti is permanently put under sanctions and criticized by Brussels and also by the Biden administration, but not Vučić. So I think if we would like to change something in the Balkan region, we have to stop this toxic appeasement policy. And then we can speak about the rule of law. But as long as we keep these criminals and these mafia clans in power, I mean, nothing will change. This is the point.
Mario, what are we doing since 2 years?
Yeah, we're discussing how to stop that. Right.
And we write letters to the parliament, we write letters to the chancellery. What we can do, we did. Yeah. But stubbornness in Berlin, stubbornness in Washington, stubbornness in Brussels, that is the problem. And the stubbornness is ignorance, willingly ignorance. Therefore I said déjà vu.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, Manfred, imagine this scenario, very unlikely, I'll admit, but Christian Schmidt calls you up and says, I'm a little bit stuck. I don't know what to do. what would be your 2 or 3 recommendations for me? What is within the power, as you see it, of the Office of the High Representative to foster or create conditions that would help change some of the institutional problems that we've been talking about today?
So anyway, yeah, I together with Alexander Rothert offered Christian Schmidt at the beginning of his office to brief him privately, personally. Until today, we didn't get any response. Stubbornness, ignorance. He knows it better. But a part of that, I would tell him, so let us sit together and get a list of issues that are important and that we can raise. And then we can, if we have this list, we can set a priority. And then we go step by step through the issues that we prioritized. Maybe we need money. Maybe we will have to admit that the rule of law in Bosnia is rotten. Then we have to restart it. That would be my recommendation. Make a balance. Yeah? What is the state of Bosnia up to now? Where are the financial, where are the economic problems that we can solve now, in the near future, or in the longer distance? But nobody is systematically go through the problems.
Yeah, we agree, and that's one of the reasons that this group was formed, is to try to identify areas where we could provide support or points of contact among the Bosnian diaspora in the United States and other places. And as you know, our focus is on EU and NATO membership for Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also in this critical area of the rule of law, so equality under the law for all citizens, and really ending genocide, denial, and the glorification of convicted war criminals. Does anyone have other thoughts or ideas, questions that they would like to share? Phil, go ahead.
I was just going to tell the judge that around 2009, we started training programs every 6 weeks in the field for the attorneys and judges who wanted to come. And we got judges. We trained in Republic of Srpska. We trained in the Federation. In addition, we set up classes for the Bosnian judges to learn English so they could read the European Court of Human Rights cases. We did many internal trainings. We did a judicial handbook or a bench book that deals with every issue commonly raised. And when the internationals left, so did the training programs, so did the drafting of documents, training documents to help the judges and the local attorneys. It all stopped. And before we left, we met with Mr. Insko, who I liked and thought very highly of, and we told him this. They had to find a way to continue the training, to continue all sorts of lectures so these people could understand the rule of law. They were coming out of a different system. We could get them ready. We even had plans to start training in the law schools. And sadly, it just ended. Frustratingly, it just ended.
I can understand that. I can understand the frustration. But, you know, education in law does take time, requires funding. requires interest. And if the situation is as such as you described it to me, the minimal interest with the colleagues in Bosnia has gone, because nobody raises the issue of rule of law anymore. It's all okay. As I experienced that once, when we had a discussion on a legal problem, my presiding judge said, wait a minute, give me the weekend. I call my colleagues in Belgrade. And she did. She did. And the colleagues in Belgrade said, your international colleagues are right. Then she returned on Monday and said, we do it in your way. But as long as the thinking is, I call someone with a higher authority, I stop thinking. I stop reflecting on legal issues. The best would be to re-establish the League of the Communists. And then I call the party. Then I get directions. But you cannot say that open and publicly, because all run away because they feel insulted. But start the discussion. Begin the discussion, renew the discussion. Otherwise, we will go down the path, downhill.
Well, I'm trying to think of a hopeful note on which to close the program. I think certainly one part of making positive changes is to have a well-grounded understanding of what the structural problems are. I think you've done an excellent job of laying those out. And there is a transition.
But it's more complex. It's more complex.
Yes, absolutely. I think we can harness the energy of people's genuine affection for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Those of us who are not Bosnian, who are part of this group, certainly share that with you. You only have to spend some time there and get an appreciation for the very rich and sophisticated culture of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and share their frustration with how these systems are not serving their interests. And we want to continue to be an advocate for those interests, to work in partnership with Bosnians all over. And I see, Marianne, your suggestion here, which is a good one. There certainly is a need for a reset in the policy of U.S. and other policies toward Bosnia and Herzegovina. But I wanted to thank you, particularly Manfred, for today, and for all of you for joining us. And we'll share this recording with other friends and look forward to working together to a brighter future, certainly for Bosnia and Herzegovina and for all of us. So thank you again for joining us today.
Welcome. I'm ready to help.
Excellent. That's the perfect note on which to end. Thank you. Goodbye to all. Bye-bye.
Bye.